My husband brought his lover into our home as if I were completely invisible. I did not scream. I did not throw plates. I simply packed my bags. He smirked at me, fully believing I would crawl back begging for his mercy. But that night, I walked out the front door with something he never even noticed was missing. 3 days later, his phone calls would not stop ringing, and by the time he discovered the absolute truth, his entire world was already beyond saving. My name is Naomi, and I am 34 years old. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled my cheating husband's life piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe that the best revenge is always served ice cold. Growing up, I learned early on that in the polished, highly exclusive circles of Atlanta society, pedigree is treated like currency. But while people like my husband Marcus inherited their wealth and their unearned arrogance, I had to build my commercial real estate empire with my own two hands. I knew the value of every single brick, every contract, and every dollar because I had fought for all of it. Marcus, on the other hand, was a 36-year-old venture capital fund manager born into an old money family that measured a person's worth by their lineage. He was deeply arrogant, dangerously narcissistic, and completely obsessed with control and appearances. He loved the idea of having a powerful, successful wife right up until the moment my success started casting a very permanent shadow over his own. It happened on a quiet Friday evening. I was sitting on the curved velvet sofa in the center of our $8 million mansion in Buckhead. The house was an architectural masterpiece filled with imported Italian marble, towering glass walls, and custom art pieces. I was deep in a financial report tracing the profit margins for a new high-rise commercial development I was spearheading when the heavy mahogany front door swung open. I did not look up immediately. I assumed it was simply Marcus returning from what he claimed was a late networking dinner with clients. But the footsteps echoing in the grand foyer were wrong. Alongside his familiar heavy tread was the sharp, distinct click of stiletto heels striking the marble floor. I slowly lowered my tablet and looked toward the entryway. Walking into my home was Chloe. She was 24 years old, a recent graduate who had just started as an intern at Marcus's investment firm. She was exactly the kind of girl men like my husband preyed upon, young enough to be easily impressed by expensive dinners and flashy cars, and foolish enough to mistake manipulation for true love. She strutted into my house wearing a tailored trench coat and signature red bottom heels. Her eyes were darting everywhere greedily, taking in the sheer scale of the wealth she thought she was stepping into. Right behind her was Marcus. He was casually dragging 3 massive Louis Vuitton suitcases across my pristine floor. I sat perfectly still, my face betraying absolutely no emotion. I watched as Marcus let go of the suitcase handles, walked over to the glass coffee table, and tossed his heavy keychain down with a loud clatter that echoed through the massive room. He unbuttoned his tailored suit jacket, stood tall, and looked down at me with an infuriating, self-satisfied smirk. He delivered his next words with the casual, cruel authority of a man ordering a cocktail. He did not stutter. He did not look away. He wanted to inflict maximum pain. "Naomi, pack up your things and clear out of the master bedroom. Chloe is moving in tonight. My lawyer will send over the divorce papers and what I consider a fair settlement tomorrow morning. You can sleep in the living room for tonight, but I want you gone." The sheer audacity of his command hung in the vast space of the living room. A fair settlement. He was offering me pennies to leave a house that I had poured my soul into designing. I slowly shifted my gaze from my husband to his mistress. Chloe did not have the decency to look ashamed. In fact, she looked entirely triumphant. She walked past me as if I were nothing more than the hired help, running her manicured fingers over a priceless custom bronze sculpture I had commissioned from a local artist. She turned around, flashed me a sickly sweet smile, and tilted her chin up. She was already playing the role of the new lady of the house, mentally redecorating the living room and imagining the high society dinner parties she would soon host. She genuinely believed she had just won the ultimate prize. Marcus stood there with his arms crossed, waiting for the explosion. He wanted me to scream. He wanted me to cry, to throw the expensive bourbon decanter at his head, to demand answers and beg him to change his mind. He wanted the sick satisfaction of seeing the strong, independent black businesswoman completely break down over losing him. He honestly thought that because his family constantly reminded me that I was just new money, I would be utterly terrified of losing the social status his last name provided. He truly believed he held every single card in the deck, and that this $8 million mansion was his kingdom to rule. I looked at the three designer suitcases resting on my marble floor. I looked at the young girl touching my artwork, and then I looked at the man I had married. A normal wife might have broken down, but I am not a normal wife. I just sat there looking back at him, calculating my next move with the exact same cold, ruthless precision that had made me a billionaire. My husband brought his lover into our home as if I were completely invisible. I did not scream. I did not throw plates. I simply packed my bags. He smirked at me, fully believing I would crawl back, begging for his mercy. But that night, I walked out the front door with something he never even noticed was missing. 3 days later, his phone calls would not stop ringing, and by the time he discovered the absolute truth, his entire world was already beyond saving. My name is Naomi, and I am 34 years old. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled my cheating husband's life piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe that the best revenge is always served ice cold. Growing up, I learned early on that in the polished, highly exclusive circles of Atlanta society, pedigree is treated like currency. But while people like my husband Marcus inherited their wealth and their unearned arrogance, I had to build my commercial real estate empire with my own two hands. I knew the value of every single brick, every contract, and every dollar because I had fought for all of it. Marcus, on the other hand, was a 36-year-old venture capital fund manager, born into an old money family that measured a person's worth by their lineage. He was deeply arrogant, dangerously narcissistic, and completely obsessed with control and appearances. He loved the idea of having a powerful, successful wife right up until the moment my success started casting a very permanent shadow over his own. It happened on a quiet Friday evening. I was sitting on the curved velvet sofa in the center of our $8 million mansion in Buckhead. The house was an architectural masterpiece filled with imported Italian marble, towering glass walls, and custom art pieces. I was deep in a financial report tracing the profit margins for a new high-rise commercial development I was spearheading when the heavy mahogany front door swung open. I did not look up immediately. I assumed it was simply Marcus returning from what he claimed was a late networking dinner with clients. But the footsteps echoing in the grand foyer were wrong. Alongside his familiar heavy tread was the sharp, distinct click of stiletto heels striking the marble floor. I slowly lowered my tablet and looked toward the entryway. Walking into my home was Chloe. She was 24 years old, a recent graduate who had just started as an intern at Marcus's investment firm. She was exactly the kind of girl men like my husband preyed upon young enough to be easily impressed by expensive dinners and flashy cars, and foolish enough to mistake manipulation for true love. She strutted into my house wearing a tailored trench coat and signature red-bottom heels. Her eyes were darting everywhere greedily, taking in the sheer scale of the wealth she thought she was stepping into. Right behind her was Marcus. He was casually dragging 3 massive Louis Vuitton suitcases across my pristine floor. I sat perfectly still, my face betraying absolutely no emotion. I watched as Marcus let go of the suitcase handles, walked over to the glass coffee table, and tossed his heavy keychain down with a loud clatter that echoed through the massive room. He unbuttoned his tailored suit jacket, stood tall, and looked down at me with an infuriating, self-satisfied smirk. He delivered his next words with the casual, cruel authority of a man ordering a cocktail. He did not stutter. He did not look away. He wanted to inflict maximum pain. Naomi, pack up your things and clear out of the master bedroom. Chloe is moving in tonight. My lawyer will send over the divorce papers and what I consider a fair settlement tomorrow morning. You can sleep in the living room for tonight, but I want you gone. The sheer audacity of his command hung in the vast space of the living room. A fair settlement. He was offering me pennies to leave a house that I had poured my soul into designing. I slowly shifted my gaze from my husband to his mistress. Chloe did not have the decency to look ashamed. In fact, she looked entirely triumphant. She walked past me as if I were nothing more than the hired help running her manicured fingers over a priceless custom bronze sculpture I had commissioned from a local artist. She turned around, flashed me a sickly sweet smile, and tilted her chin up. She was already playing the role of the new lady of the house, mentally redecorating the living room and imagining the high society dinner parties she would soon host. She genuinely believed she had just won the ultimate prize. Marcus stood there with his arms crossed, waiting for the explosion. He wanted me to scream. He wanted me to cry, to throw the expensive bourbon decanter at his head, to demand answers and beg him to change his mind. He wanted the sick satisfaction of seeing the strong, independent black businesswoman completely break down over losing him. He honestly thought that because his family constantly reminded me that I was just new money, I would be utterly terrified of losing the social status his last name provided. He truly believed he held every single card in the deck, and that this $8 million mansion was his kingdom to rule. I looked at the 3 designer suitcases resting on my marble floor. I looked at the young girl touching my artwork, and then I looked at the man I had married. A normal wife might have broken down, but I am not a normal wife. I just sat there looking back at him, calculating my next move with the exact same cold, ruthless precision that had made me a billionaire. The air in my living room suddenly felt incredibly thin. The vast open concept space of my home seemed to physically shrink, the walls closing in around me to form a suffocating invisible cage. I slowly turned my gaze away from my husband and his new trophy. Sitting on the adjacent custom-upholstered sofa, completely unbothered by the sheer disrespect unfolding in front of them, were my mother-in-law Beatrice and my sister-in-law Sarah. They had been there the entire time. They had arrived an hour before Marcus, claiming they wanted to drop by for a casual Friday evening visit. I had served them chamomile tea in my finest bone china. Now I realized they had not come for a visit. They had come for a front-row seat to my execution. Beatrice Sterling sat with her spine perfectly straight, her legs crossed at the ankles. She wore her signature pearls and a tailored tweed suit that practically screamed old money. She took a slow, deliberate sip from her teacup, her eyes fixed on me with a look of absolute disdain. Beatrice had never liked me. From the moment Marcus introduced me to the Sterling family, she made it abundantly clear that my self-made wealth was distasteful. To Beatrice, a woman who earned her money in the gritty world of commercial real estate was nothing more than a glorified laborer with a fat bank account. She prided herself on her family lineage, completely ignoring the fact that the Sterling fortune had been quietly drying up for a decade. Beatrice set her teacup down on the glass table. The sharp clink of the porcelain cut through the heavy silence of the room. She looked at Marcus, then at Chloe, and finally back to me, her lips curling into a cruel, satisfied sneer. "You really should not look so surprised," Naomi Beatrice said, her voice dripping with venomous elegance. "We all knew this day was coming. The Sterling legacy requires a certain type of woman. It needs an heir, first and foremost, and it needs a wife who actually knows how to stand behind her husband." I remained perfectly still, letting her words hang in the air. She wanted me to flinch. She wanted me to show a crack in my armor. I refused to give her the satisfaction. "You are simply too hard, Naomi," Beatrice continued, emboldened by my silence. "Your energy is far too masculine for a man like my son. You walk into a room and try to command it like a boardroom. You come home reeking of concrete, steel, and construction sites. A man of Marcus's stature does not want to come home to a business partner who constantly tries to outshine him. He wants a soft, accommodating environment. He wants a woman who understands her place. You simply do not fit, Marcus. You never did. You are a builder, Naomi, but you never knew how to build a proper home." Every word was calculated to strike at my deepest insecurities. For years I had bent over backward to accommodate Marcus's fragile ego. I had downplayed my massive commercial acquisitions. I had skipped award ceremonies honoring my business achievements just to attend his tedious charity galas so he could play the role of the prominent benefactor. I had funded the lifestyle that kept Beatrice draped in pearls and designer suits. Yet here she was, sitting on the sofa I paid for in the house I owned, telling me I was not enough of a woman for her son. Before I could even formulate a response to Beatrice's archaic insults, Sarah leaned forward. Sarah was married to Marcus's older brother, Julian. Julian was a man who had never held down a real job in his life, preferring to live off the dwindling family trust while pretending to be an entrepreneur. Sarah, a white woman from a remarkably average background, had married into the Sterling family and immediately made it her life's mission to act as the ultimate authority on Black elite culture. She was the textbook definition of a toxic pick-me girl, constantly weaponizing fake empathy and delivering microaggressions wrapped in a sweet, concerned tone. Sarah placed her hand over her heart and offered me a look of deep, patronizing pity. "Naomi, please do not make this harder than it has to be," Sarah said, her voice coated in artificial sweetness. "We all know you are a strong, independent Black woman. You are a powerhouse. You do not even need a man. You have your buildings and your company. But you have to understand Marcus needs a real woman to nurture him." I stared at Sarah, watching her feign compassion while she actively cheered for the destruction of my marriage. She loved this. She absolutely reveled in seeing the highly successful self-made Black woman being knocked down a peg. It validated her own choices. It made her feel superior for being the submissive, unemployed wife who catered to her husband's every whim. "You just intimidate him, Naomi." Sarah continued, leaning closer, as if she were sharing a piece of friendly advice. "I read an article recently about how hyper-successful women naturally emasculate their partners. It is just biology. You never let Marcus lead. You never let him feel like the provider. Chloe is young, she is fresh, and she looks up to him. She gives him the respect and admiration he deserves as a sterling man. You should be proud of everything you have accomplished in your career, but you failed at being a wife. Just step aside gracefully. Do not turn this into an ugly, bitter stereotype. Just pack your bags and leave with whatever dignity you have left." The sheer audacity of her words was almost breathtaking. "Do not turn this into an angry stereotype. Step aside gracefully." She was using my race, my success, and my independence as weapons to justify my husband bringing his 24-year-old intern into my home. I looked around the room, taking in the scene. Marcus stood by the door, his chest puffed out, thoroughly enjoying the fact that his mother and his sister-in-law were doing his dirty work. Chloe stood behind him, practically glowing with validation, having just been crowned a real woman by the matriarch of the family. Beatrice and Sarah sat comfortably on my velvet sofa, waiting for me to shatter. They were four predators circling what they believed to be a wounded animal. They had orchestrated this entire ambush perfectly. They wanted to strip me of my pride, kick me out of my own master bedroom, and force me to sleep on the couch like a discarded servant before tossing me a meager settlement in the morning. They expected a breakdown. They expected me to scream that it was unfair, to list everything I had done for this family, to demand respect. They expected me to fight for a man who had just brought his mistress into my sanctuary. But as I sat there listening to their venom, my mind was not clouded by grief or heartbreak. My mind was razor sharp. Every insult they hurled at me only solidified my resolve. Beatrice thought my energy was too masculine because I understood the brutal, unforgiving world of business. Sarah thought I did not need a man because I had my own empire. Marcus thought he held all the power because he believed his name commanded respect. They were all blinded by their own arrogance. They were so focused on tearing down my character that they had completely lost sight of the facts. They forgot who actually paid for the marble floors they were standing on. They forgot who actually funded the bank accounts that kept the Sterling legacy afloat. They had mistaken my quiet patience as a wife for the weakness of a victim. I did not say a single word in my defense. I did not raise my voice. I simply took a slow, deep breath and let their toxic words wash over me. I allowed them to feel victorious. I wanted them to feel absolutely invincible in this moment. Because the higher they placed themselves on their imaginary pedestals, the more devastating their fall was going to be. The trap had already been set, and they had just walked right into it entirely of their own free will. The silence in the room stretched out thick and suffocating for them, but completely liberating for me. I felt the camera of my own mind push in tightly on my face, focusing purely on the icy clarity in my eyes. I did not shed a single tear. I did not utter a single word of argument. Instead, the corners of my mouth curled upward into a faint, chilling smile. Marcus shifted his weight, his smirk faltering for just a fraction of a second. He was confused. Beatrice narrowed her eyes, clearly expecting me to beg or shout or throw the nearest vase. Sarah leaned forward, waiting for the angry stereotype she so desperately wanted to witness. But I denied them all. I simply stood up from the velvet sofa, smoothing the invisible wrinkles from my tailored trousers with agonizing slowness. I turned my back on them and walked toward the floating glass staircase. My heels clicked rhythmically against the marble, echoing through the cavernous foyer. I could feel their eyes boring into my spine, but I did not look back. I ascended the stairs with the perfect posture of a woman who owned the ground she walked on. The moment I pushed open the heavy double doors of the master bedroom, the rhythm of the night changed. I did not waste time. I pulled exactly 2 sleek black suitcases from the top shelf of my closet. I moved with absolute precision. No frantic throwing of garments. No crying over memories. My hands worked in calculated, rapid movements. I folded 3 bespoke business suits, a handful of silk blouses, and a few essentials. I bypassed the evening gowns Marcus loved to show me off in. I bypassed the expensive lingerie he had bought to appease his own guilt. I packed only what belonged to Naomi, the businesswoman, leaving behind everything that belonged to Naomi, the wife. Once the suitcases were zipped shut, I walked past the king-sized bed and stepped into the deepest corner of my custom-built walk-in closet. I pressed my palm against a seamless wood panel. It popped open with a soft click, revealing a biometric keypad. I pressed my thumb against the glowing scanner, and the heavy steel door of the hidden wall safe hissed open. Inside, nestled on shelves of dark velvet, sat hundreds of thousands of dollars in jewelry. There were diamond tennis bracelets, a vintage Cartier watch, and a heavy emerald necklace Marcus had purchased after a particularly guilty weekend trip to Miami. It was a dragon's hoard of apology gifts and blood money. I ignored all of it. Let Chloe drape herself in his guilty conscience. Let her wear the shiny trinkets that marked the decay of his character. I was not interested in sparkling distractions. I reached past the velvet boxes to the very back of the safe. My fingers closed around 2 objects of true value. The first was a matte black, heavily encrypted flash drive. It was small enough to hide in a clenched fist, but heavy enough to sink a financial empire. It contained every shredded document, every forged signature, and every illegal wire transfer Marcus had executed over the past 3 years. It was the digital autopsy of his fraudulent venture capital fund. The second object was a thick manila envelope containing the original notarized property deed, the undeniable legally binding proof that the sprawling $8 million Buckhead estate was completely owned by a private limited liability company. A company in which I was the sole managing member. I slipped the flash drive and the deed into my structured leather tote bag. The real treasures were secured, the trap was armed. I grabbed the handles of my 2 suitcases and walked back out to the landing. The wheels glided smoothly over the hardwood floors, the sound announcing my return. As I descended the glass staircase, the scene in the living room had shifted into an early victory celebration. Marcus had poured himself a glass of his most expensive aged bourbon. Chloe was sitting far too close to him on the sofa, her hand resting territorially on his thigh. Beatrice and Sarah were murmuring to each other, undoubtedly praising the swift, bloodless coup they believed they had just pulled off. I reached the bottom of the stairs and rolled my suitcases right up to the edge of the glass coffee table. The conversation stopped. 4 pairs of eyes snapped up to look at me, expecting to see a defeated woman slinking out the door. Marcus took a slow, arrogant sip of his bourbon. The amber liquid sloshed gently over the single large ice cube in his crystal glass. He raised an eyebrow, waiting for me to say something pathetic. He wanted a goodbye speech. He wanted me to tell him how much he was destroying our vows. I looked him dead in the eye. Without breaking contact, I raised my left hand. I used my thumb to slowly slide the massive 3-carat flawless diamond engagement ring over my knuckle. I followed it immediately with the platinum wedding band. The metal felt instantly cold as it left my skin. I held the rings over his glass. I let them drop. The heavy platinum and diamonds splashed directly into his expensive bourbon. The ice clinked sharply against the crystal glass. Drops of amber liquid splattered onto the pristine glass table. Marcus flinched, pulling the glass back slightly, his arrogant smirk instantly replaced by a look of sheer confused outrage. He stared down at the rings resting at the bottom of his drink, then snapped his gaze back up to my face. I picked up the handles of my suitcases and adjusted my leather tote bag on my shoulder. I looked at the man who thought he had just ruined my life. I looked at the young girl who thought she had just won the lottery. And I looked at the family who had treated me like an outsider for 8 long years. "Enjoy the house," I said. My voice was quiet, perfectly, even, and utterly devoid of emotion. I turned on my heel and walked toward the grand entryway. Behind me, the shock finally wore off and the venom rushed back in to fill the silence. Beatrice let out a harsh, barking laugh. "Good riddance," she called out, her voice echoing off the marble walls. "I knew you never had the spine for this family." Sarah chimed in immediately, her voice dripping with fake pity. "Do not worry about Marcus, Naomi. We will make sure he is well taken care of." I did not stop. I did not look back. I pulled the heavy mahogany front door open and stepped out into the crisp, cool Atlanta night air. The heavy door clicked shut behind me, severing the last physical tie to my suffocating marriage. Waiting at the bottom of the grand circular driveway was a sleek black SUV. My private driver, who had been on standby for the past hour, immediately stepped out and opened the trunk. He took my 2 suitcases without a word, loading them smoothly before opening the rear passenger door for me. I climbed into the plush leather seat, and the door closed with a solid, satisfying thud, blocking out the world outside. The engine purred to life, and the SUV began to glide down the long manicured driveway, carrying me away from the estate. I sat back in the darkness of the cabin, the streetlights passing in a rhythmic blur outside the tinted windows. I reached into my tote bag and ran my fingers over the edges of the manila envelope and the cold casing of the flash drive. They thought they had won. They thought they had humiliated me, discarded me, and claimed their prize. But they had absolutely no idea that the ticking clock had just started. The game was no longer about saving a marriage. It was about absolute surgical destruction, and I was going to enjoy every single second of it. The morning sun rose over Atlanta, casting a golden hue across the sprawling backyard of the Buckhead mansion. A camera could easily descend from that clear blue sky, gliding smoothly over the towering oak trees and the pristine manicured lawns to reveal a scene of absolute performative extravagance. Marcus was not wasting any time. Barely 12 hours after I had walked out the front door, he was already hosting a lavish daytime barbecue to debut his new life. But this was not a standard backyard cookout. This was a carefully curated showcase for Atlanta's black elite. Waiters in crisp white shirts circulated with silver trays of Wagyu beef sliders, imported oysters, and flutes of vintage champagne. The guests were dressed in tailored linen suits and silk sundresses, their laughter sharp and practiced. They were the city's power brokers, fund managers, and socialites, all pretending not to notice the sudden absence of the woman who had actually paid for the grass they were standing on. I watched all of it unfold in high definition. I was sitting miles away in the private viewing room of my corporate headquarters. A wall of ultra-high-resolution monitors bathed the darkened room in a soft, cool glow. When I designed the security system for the Buckhead estate, Marcus had scoffed at the expense. He thought it was just about keeping intruders out. He never realized the system was entirely hardwired to a private server that only I controlled. I had visual coverage of every single room, every hallway, and every inch of the grounds. More importantly, I had crystal clear audio. On the center monitor, I watched Marcus playing the role of the triumphant king. He wore a custom-tailored casual suit, holding a cigar in one hand and resting the other firmly on Chloe's lower back. Chloe was dressed in a white designer sundress that was just a fraction too short for an old-money daytime gathering, a subtle misstep that the older women in the crowd were definitely judging even as they smiled to her face. My mother-in-law Beatrice and my sister-in-law Sarah shadowed Chloe like protective chaperones. They were actively introducing her to the guests, officially endorsing her as my replacement. They were putting their own reputations on the line to validate his infidelity. I tapped a key on my control deck, isolating the audio feed from the hidden directional microphone mounted above the outdoor cigar lounge. Marcus had stepped away from the main crowd, guiding three older, deeply influential investors toward the secluded stone patio near the infinity pool. These were men whose money kept Marcus's venture capital fund afloat. As they sat down on the plush outdoor furniture, the clinking of ice against crystal echoed perfectly through my studio speakers. I leaned back in my leather chair, turning up the volume. Marcus lit his cigar, taking a slow, arrogant drag before leaning forward to address the men. His voice was smooth, dripping with the fake confidence of a desperate man. "I appreciate you all coming out today," Marcus said, keeping his tone conversational but serious. "I know the sudden changes in my household might raise some eyebrows, but I assure you it is a necessary restructuring. Naomi and I had fundamentally different visions for the future. I needed a partner who supports my legacy, not someone constantly competing with it." The men chuckled, a low, guttural sound of complicit misogyny. They nodded along, sipping their drinks, completely buying into his narrative of the exhausted husband shedding a difficult, overly ambitious wife. But Marcus had not pulled these men aside just to gossip about his divorce. He was buttering them up for the pitch. "With my personal life finally streamlined, I am completely focused on the fund," Marcus continued, his voice dropping an octave to signal exclusivity. "We are looking at a massive acquisition in the tech sector next quarter. The returns are going to be unprecedented. However, we have a temporary liquidity issue. Just a short-term gap in our capital reserves due to some aggressive overseas expansions." I watched the screen intently. A temporary liquidity issue. That was his sanitized corporate translation for a massive catastrophic sinkhole. One of the older investors, a man who had been with Marcus's firm for years, raised an eyebrow. "How big of a gap are we talking about, Marcus? We do not like surprises." "Just 20 million," Marcus replied without missing a beat. "It is a drop in the bucket compared to the projected yields, but I need to bridge that gap quietly and immediately before the board meetings next month. I do not want to trigger any unnecessary panic among the shareholders." The investors exchanged skeptical glances. 20 million was not pocket change, even in their circles. Securing a bridge loan of that magnitude off the books and outside of standard board approval required serious unencumbered collateral. "I already have the leverage lined up," Marcus assured them, leaning back and gesturing broadly to the sprawling estate around him. "This property, the house, the grounds, the entire Buckhead estate. It appraises at just over 8 million, but with my banking connections, I can leverage it against my personal equity to secure the 20 million bridge loan by Monday morning." The audacity of his statement was so profound it almost made me laugh out loud. "And your wife, the oldest investor?" asked, his voice sharp with business acumen. "I assume her name is on the deed. Divorce proceedings can tie up real estate assets for years. You cannot leverage a contested property, Marcus. No bank will touch it." Marcus smiled, tapping the ash from his cigar. "That is the beauty of it," he said, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated arrogance. "I bought this property. It is entirely in my name. Naomi was so busy building her own little commercial empire that she never bothered to look at the residential paperwork. I am the sole owner. The estate is free and clear. My lawyers are drafting the final loan agreements as we speak. I will have the cash injection by Monday afternoon. The fund will be stabilized, and nobody will be the wiser." I sat alone in the dark room, listening to the man I had married confess his entire fraudulent strategy into a microphone he did not know existed. He was attempting to secure a massive loan based on a complete fabrication. He was lying to his biggest investors, planning to commit bank fraud to cover up his gross financial mismanagement. He honestly believed he had outsmarted me. He believed that because I operated in the brutal world of skyscrapers and commercial zoning, I had somehow neglected to secure the very roof over my own head. He looked at the manicured lawns and the Italian marble and saw his own salvation. He did not know that the ground he was standing on belonged to a private limited liability company. He did not know that I was the sole managing member of that company, and he certainly did not know that the original deed proving my absolute ownership was currently resting in a manila envelope on the desk right in front of me. I reached out and traced the edge of the envelope with my fingertip. Marcus was hosting a victory party on the edge of a cliff, completely blind to the fact that I was the one holding the remote detonator. He needed that $20 million loan to survive the week. He had staked his entire professional reputation, his freedom, and his future on a house he did not even own. I reached over to my control panel and cleanly severed the audio feed. The quiet hum of my office rushed back in to fill the silence. The trap was no longer just set. Marcus had cheerfully walked inside, locked the door behind himself, and handed me the key. The camera of my own reality shifted instantly, panning down to my Christian Louboutin pumps, clicking sharply against the polished Italian marble floor of my corporate headquarters. A low-angle tracking shot would perfectly capture the sheer towering scale of the sterling commercial real estate building, a monument of glass and steel that I built from the ground up in the heart of downtown Atlanta. I walked down the main corridor, the morning sunlight catching the sharp, structured angles of my tailored Alexander McQueen suit. Junior executives and senior vice presidents alike parted like the Red Sea as I passed, their hushed conversations stopping entirely. They knew better than to interrupt me today. I was not radiating the fragile grief of a scorned wife. I was radiating the absolute terrifying power of a CEO stepping onto the battlefield. I pushed open the heavy, double-frosted glass doors to my primary boardroom. The room was expansive, featuring a massive, custom-cut black walnut conference table that stretched 20 feet long across the center of the space. Waiting for me were 6 of the most ruthless, brilliant legal and financial minds in Atlanta. These were not family counselors or divorce mediators. This was my personal war council. Seated around the table were top-tier corporate litigators, aggressive forensic accountants, and my lead real estate attorney, a sharp-minded black woman named Evelyn, who had navigated billion-dollar acquisitions by my side for the past 5 years. While Marcus was outside in his linen suit, flipping Wagyu burgers and pouring champagne for men he was actively trying to defraud, I was sitting down to dismantle his entire existence with surgical precision. I took my seat at the head of the table. The panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline behind me served as the perfect backdrop for what was about to happen. I reached into my structured leather tote bag and pulled out the 2 items I had retrieved from the hidden wall safe the night before. I placed the encrypted matte black flash drive and the thick manila envelope onto the polished walnut surface. The soft, heavy thud of the envelope hitting the wood commanded the immediate attention of everyone in the room. There were no sympathetic glances here, no pitying words about my failed marriage. In this room, we only dealt in assets, liabilities, and leverage, and Marcus had just become my greatest liability. Let us begin with the primary residence, I said, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet boardroom. Marcus is currently hosting a backyard debut for his mistress at the Buckhead estate. More importantly, he is actively soliciting a $20 million bridge loan from his top investors, promising to use that exact property as his sole collateral. Evelyn leaned forward, adjusting her gold-rimmed glasses as she opened a matching file folder on her end of the table. She allowed a sharp, humorless smile to touch her lips. That is going to be a rather significant problem for him, considering Marcus Sterling does not own a single square foot of that property. This was the first major twist in the narrative my husband thought he controlled so perfectly. 18 months ago, I noticed the very first red flags of his infidelity. It was not lipstick on a collar or cheap perfume. Marcus was too careful and too arrogant for cliches. It was a discrepancy in our shared financial statements, a subtle, almost invisible shift in his spending habits. A recurring charge for a private car service to a boutique hotel downtown. A missing hour here, an unexplained weekend trip there. Most women would have hired a private investigator to catch him in the act, or confronted him with tears and angry accusations. I did not do either of those things. I knew that confronting a narcissist without having absolute leverage was a fool's errand. Instead of fighting him, I quietly and systematically began restructuring my entire financial portfolio. I had Evelyn draft a stack of highly complex, incredibly dense property management restructuring documents under the guise of an annual tax optimization strategy. Hidden deep within those hundreds of pages of dense legal jargon was a quitclaim deed for the Buckhead mansion. Marcus, who was always too arrogant to read the fine print and too eager to get back to his secret rendezvous with Chloe, signed exactly where I told him to sign with a smile on his face. With one stroke of his expensive fountain pen, he surrendered every ounce of his legal claim to the estate. The moment the ink dried, I transferred the property into an anonymous limited liability company. I meticulously layered the corporate structure, bearing the true ownership behind two holding companies registered in Delaware to ensure absolute privacy. I was the sole managing member and majority shareholder of the parent corporation. To the outside world, to Atlanta society, and to Marcus himself, the house simply existed as our marital home. He continued to walk through the front doors every evening, completely blind to the fact that he was no longer a homeowner. He was essentially a squatter, living on my company's property. His family, particularly Beatrice and Sarah, loved to remind me that I was new money, implying that I lacked the sophistication to protect my wealth. They prided themselves on the sterling legacy while living off dwindling trust funds. They underestimated me so profoundly that they never bothered to check the county property records. Now Marcus was standing on my manicured lawn, drinking my champagne, and telling his most powerful investors that he possessed the deed to an $8 million estate. If he submits that loan application on Monday morning, claiming ownership of the Buckhead property, Evelyn stated, tapping her manicured fingernail against her legal pad, he will be committing textbook bank fraud. Submitting falsified collateral documentation to a federally insured institution carries a mandatory minimum sentence. He is handing the federal government his own indictment on a silver platter. I nodded, interlacing my fingers and resting them on the table. He is desperate, I told the room. His venture capital fund is drowning, and he is trying to use my assets as a life raft. He told his investors he would have the paperwork finalized by Monday afternoon, so nobody would panic. We are going to ensure that he never even makes it to the bank lobby. The lead forensic accountant, an older gentleman who had spent 20 years dissecting white-collar crime, pushed his chair back slightly. He gestured toward the matte black flash drive resting near my hands. If the real estate maneuver was just your containment strategy, I assume that drive contains the actual explosive. I looked down at the small piece of encrypted technology. The quitclaim deed was just a way to ensure Marcus could not leverage my hard-earned wealth to save his sinking ship. It was a defensive move to protect my empire. But the contents of this flash drive were purely offensive. It was the culmination of 18 months of quiet observation, gathering digital breadcrumbs that Marcus thought he had permanently deleted from his home office servers. He thought because I was out visiting construction sites, I did not understand the intricate flow of venture capital data. We have secured the perimeter, I said, my gaze sweeping across the focused faces of my war council. He has no house to sell, no collateral to borrow against, and no idea that the ground beneath his feet has already vanished. Now it is time to dismantle his professional legacy completely. I slid the flash drive across the polished walnut table. Let us see exactly how much money my husband has stolen from his clients. The camera of my perspective shifted perfectly into an over-the-shoulder shot, focusing tightly on the massive glowing monitor at the center of the boardroom table. Lines of encrypted code cascaded down the screen in a rapid, relentless waterfall of green and white text. The cool, ambient blue light from the high-resolution display washed over my face, reflecting in my eyes and catching the subtle, razor-sharp smirk that had firmly settled on my lips. Elias, my lead forensic accountant, was a man who practically spoke in numbers. He typed furiously, his fingers dancing across the mechanical keyboard as he bypassed the final layers of Marcus's amateur security protocols. Marcus had always thought he was a tech-savvy genius, but he had built his digital fortress using off-the-shelf encryption software. It was an insultingly fragile wall for someone hiding so many skeletons. With a final sharp click of the Enter key, the scrolling code stopped. The encryption dissolved entirely. The screen blinked, and a series of meticulously organized folders populated the display. "We are in?" Elias announced, his voice dropping to a hushed, almost reverent whisper as he opened the master file. "Welcome to Marcus Sterling's Shadow Empire." The spreadsheet that opened on the massive screen was staggering. It was Marcus's black ledger, the true unfiltered accounting of his venture capital fund. It was a digital graveyard of phantom assets, fake returns, and massive bleeding liabilities. But it was not just a record of a failing business. It was a comprehensive, undeniable confession of federal crimes. I leaned forward, the leather of my chair creaking softly in the silent room. Evelyn, my lead attorney, stood up and leaned over the table, her eyes scanning the columns with the practiced gaze of a predator spotting blood. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at a cluster of transactions dating back 14 months. "Look at the origin of these incoming transfers," Evelyn instructed, her tone sharpening into a weapon. "These are not standard capital injections from his verified investor pool. These are bridge loans. High-interest short-term corporate loans designed to cover immediate cash flow crises." Elias clicked on the attached PDF documentation linked to the loans. The screen split to reveal scanned copies of the loan agreements. I stared at the digital documents, my smirk deepening into a look of absolute terrifying satisfaction. Marcus had not secured those desperate bridge loans using his own fund's collateral. He had used my name. He had drafted fraudulent corporate guarantees, listing two of my most profitable commercial development projects as the primary backing for over $30 million in emergency cash. And right there at the bottom of the final page was my signature. It was a flawless, expertly traced forgery. "He committed federal wire fraud across state lines," Evelyn stated flatly, crossing her arms. "He digitally transmitted these forged guarantee documents to banking institutions in New York and Chicago. Each separate email, each individual transfer of funds based on this fraudulent collateral constitutes a separate federal offense. The statutory maximums for these charges are catastrophic. He did not just cross a legal line, he sprinted past it and set the bridge on fire." Marcus had believed his family name made him untouchable. He believed that the Sterling legacy was a shield that would protect him from the scrutiny of bank auditors and federal regulators. He had grown so comfortable in his arrogance that he actually thought he could use my hard-earned commercial empire as a secret slush fund to hide his incompetence. He forged the signature of a billionaire real estate mogul to save his sinking ship, completely underestimating the fact that I audit my own shadow networks relentlessly. But the forged loans were only the beginning. The true depths of his moral bankruptcy were hiding in the next folder. Elias clicked back to the main ledger and opened a directory labeled Client Reserves. As the data populated the screen, a collective heavy silence fell over the boardroom. Even my seasoned team of cutthroat professionals seemed momentarily stunned by what they were looking at. "This is not corporate money," Elias said, his voice tightening with genuine disgust. "These are retail investor accounts, pension funds, individual retirement accounts for union workers, teachers, and small business owners who trusted the Sterling brand." Marcus had not just been making bad bets with millionaire capital. When his aggressive overseas expansions began to collapse, he panicked. To keep his elite, high-net-worth investors happy and to maintain the illusion of record-breaking returns, he had to find cash elsewhere. He found it by quietly siphoning millions of dollars out of the secure retirement accounts of his most vulnerable middle-class clients. He was running a sophisticated, ruthless Ponzi scheme, bleeding the life savings of hardworking people dry, just to pay fake dividends to his wealthy country club friends. I stared at the screen, analyzing the routed transfers. I watched the digital trail of stolen pensions flowing out of secure escrow accounts, washing through a series of offshore shell companies in the Cayman Islands and trickling back into Marcus's personal operating accounts. This was the money he was using to lease luxury sports cars. This was the money he was using to buy 24-year-old interns like Chloe Diamond tennis bracelets and $15,000 Hermes bags. He was quite literally stealing the future from working-class families to fund his pathetic midlife crisis. I thought about Beatrice and Sarah sitting on my velvet sofa, dripping in their old money superiority, lecturing me about how my energy was too masculine and how my hands were too dirty from the construction business. They looked down on me because I built things from the dirt up. Meanwhile, their precious golden boy, the shining prince of the Sterling legacy, was nothing more than a common thief in a bespoke suit. The sheer breathtaking hypocrisy of it all tasted like sweet wine on my tongue. "We have him," Evelyn said, breaking the silence. "The forgery is enough to put him away, but this embezzlement is going to bring the entire federal government down on his head. When the Securities and Exchange Commission sees this ledger, they will not just audit him. They will freeze every single asset associated with his name, raid his offices, and seek an immediate federal indictment. He is looking at decades behind bars. He is a white-collar criminal of the highest order." "Print the entire ledger," I commanded, my voice slicing through the room with absolute authority. "Prepare the encrypted files for transmission. Draft the whistleblower reports and make sure every single forged signature is highlighted, cross-referenced, and indexed." My team moved with instantaneous military precision. The printers hummed to life. The servers whirred as the deadly data was packaged into heavily encrypted, undeniable digital bombs. Marcus thought he had won. He thought he was currently the smartest man in Atlanta, standing in a backyard that did not belong to him, drinking champagne paid for with stolen money, and parading a naive mistress in front of his wealthy peers. He thought his biggest problem was a bitter, discarded wife. He had absolutely no idea that he was a dead man walking. The flash drive had given me everything I needed. He was not just a cheating husband anymore. He was a federal target. And I was about to gladly hand the government the exact coordinates for the drone strike. The camera lens of my reality zoomed in tightly, executing an extreme close-up on my manicured index finger as it hovered just a fraction of an inch above the glowing enter key on my laptop. The room was holding its collective breath. I let the weight of the moment settle over me. For 8 years I had built my husband up. I had smoothed over his insecurities, tolerated his demanding family, and provided the silent, unyielding foundation upon which he had constructed his entire counterfeit persona. He had repaid my loyalty by bringing a 24-year-old intern into my home and demanding I surrender my sanctuary. I pressed the key. The camera in my mind immediately executed a rapid, violent pullback, snapping away from my hand to reveal the vast expanse of the boardroom. The sudden visual retreat mirrored the explosive reality of what had just been unleashed. It was a digital detonation. There was no smoke, no shattered glass, and no deafening roar, but the destruction was absolute. Elias stared at his monitors as the progress bars filled and vanished in the blink of an eye. The primary payload had officially breached the external firewalls. The heavily encrypted, meticulously indexed file containing Marcus's black ledger, his forged bridge loan guarantees, and his detailed embezzlement records had been successfully transmitted directly to the secure whistleblower portal of the Securities and Exchange Commission. A time-stamped receipt flashed onto the screen confirming that the federal government was now in possession of everything they needed to dismantle Marcus Sterling. "Transmission confirmed," Elias stated, his voice devoid of any inflection. "The SEC Enforcement Division has received the data package. I have also routed a secondary targeted dossier directly to the Chief Risk Management Officer at the exact banking institution currently underwriting his $20 million loan application." I leaned back in my chair and took a slow, deep breath. The air in my boardroom tasted like victory. By sending the forged documents directly to the bank's risk management department, I had effectively severed Marcus's financial jugular. When the loan officers opened their emails on Monday morning, they would not see a promising venture capital prospect. They would see a desperate, cornered man attempting to secure federal funds using falsified collateral belonging to one of the most prominent commercial real estate developers in the state. The bank would not simply deny the loan. Federal banking regulations would require them to immediately flag his accounts, freeze his assets, to prevent capital flight and alert the authorities. Marcus was bleeding out and he did not even know he had been cut. But federal investigations and banking audits take a few days to fully materialize. I was not a woman who liked to wait for my gratification. Marcus had demanded I pack my bags and leave my own home in the middle of the night. I intended to return the favor with extreme prejudice. Now, for the final piece of the tactical strike, I said, turning my attention away from the glowing screens and looking directly at Evelyn. Bring me the closing documents. Evelyn smiled a sharp, dangerous smile. She reached into her leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal paperwork bound by a heavy binder clip. She slid the documents across the polished walnut table until they rested directly in front of me. She uncapped a heavy gold Mont Blanc pen and laid it meticulously beside the signature line. As you requested, Naomi, Evelyn began, her tone shifting into pure legal professionalism. We have secured a buyer for the Buckhead estate. It is a Dubai-based real estate conglomerate that specializes in acquiring high-yield luxury properties in cash. They have been trying to get into the Atlanta market for a year, and they jumped at the opportunity to purchase a fully furnished turnkey mansion in the most exclusive neighborhood in the city. I picked up the pen, feeling the cool, heavy metal against my skin. And the specific stipulations, I asked, my eyes scanning the dense legal text. Evelyn tapped the contract. The purchase price was finalized at $8.5 million, an all-cash transaction. The funds have already been placed in a secure escrow account and will be released to your corporate holding company the moment your signature is verified. But the most crucial element is Section 4, Paragraph 2, the vacant possession clause. I read the paragraph carefully. It was a masterpiece of aggressive real estate law. Because Marcus had signed the quitclaim deed 18 months ago, he had legally surrendered all tenant rights and ownership claims. He was not a renter, he had no lease. Legally speaking, he was nothing more than an unauthorized occupant residing on private corporate property. The buyers agreed to waive the standard 30-day closing period. Evelyn explained, her voice practically humming with anticipation. In exchange for purchasing the estate fully furnished, including all the custom art, the imported furniture, and every single thing Marcus currently believes he owns, the buyers require absolute immediate vacant possession. Once you sign these papers, the foreign conglomerate becomes the sole legal owner of the property. They have already retained a local property management firm with a mandate to enforce a ruthless 24-hour eviction protocol. Marcus had brought Chloe into my house with 3 Louis Vuitton suitcases, planning to play house in the master bedroom I had designed. He was out there right now smoking cigars on the patio, promising his investors that the house was the bedrock of his financial salvation. He had no idea that the grass he was standing on the roof over his head and the very bed he planned to sleep in were about to become the property of a billionaire holding company thousands of miles away. I placed the tip of the gold pen against the crisp white paper. I did not forge a signature. I did not hide behind fake guarantees or stolen pension funds. I signed my own name with bold, sweeping strokes. I signed away the mansion, the memories, and the final physical remnant of my disastrous marriage. I flipped the pages, initialing the margins, authorizing the immediate transfer of ownership. With the final stroke of the pen, it was done. Evelyn gathered the documents, reviewing my signatures with a nod of approval. She pulled out her phone and sent a single encrypted text message to the escrow officer. We sat in silence for exactly 45 seconds. Then the notification chimed on my personal tablet. $8.5 million had just successfully cleared into my primary corporate holding account. The Buckhead estate is sold, Evelyn announced, closing her file folder with a definitive snap. The new owners have been notified. The property management firm is dispatching an agent to the local sheriff's office to file the emergency notice of trespass. Marcus and his guests have less than 24 hours before they are legally and physically removed from the premises. I stood up from the conference table and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows. I looked out over the sprawling, sunlit metropolis of Atlanta. The city was a grid of steel, concrete, and commerce. It was a world built on contracts, leverage, and ruthlessness. Marcus had always thought he owned this city because of his family name. He thought he could manipulate the rules, steal from the vulnerable, and discard me without consequence. He was wrong. I was the architect of my own life, and I had just demolished his. The digital payload was sitting in the servers of the federal government. The bank was preparing to freeze his entire operating budget, and the sheriff's department was currently printing a document that would render him homeless by tomorrow afternoon. I turned back to my war council. The men and women in the room were already packing up their briefcases, their expressions sharp and satisfied. We had executed a flawless multi-pronged attack without firing a single physical shot. "Take the weekend off," I told them, my voice echoing with absolute authority. "Keep your phones on for emergencies, but the hard work is done. Now we just sit back and wait for his phone calls to start." I knew Marcus. I knew his arrogance, his fragile ego, and his desperate need for control. When the walls started closing in, when the bank denied his access, and when the eviction notice was slapped against the front door of the mansion he thought he owned, he would not call his lawyers first. He would call me. He would try to intimidate me, to threaten me, and to bully me into fixing the mess he had created. He would expect the obedient, quiet wife to answer the phone and accept his abuse. I picked up my leather tote bag and walked out of the boardroom. The weekend was just beginning, and I was going to enjoy every single moment of his total catastrophic descent into madness. The weekend passed with the quiet, humming tension of a drawn bowstring. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear. I sat behind my desk, the city spread out below me, bathed in the sharp, revealing light of the rising sun. I had a perfectly pulled double espresso resting on a leather coaster beside my keyboard. The digital clock in the corner of my screen ticked over to exactly 10:15 a.m. My private cell phone, the one only top executives and family members had the number to, lit up. Marcus was calling. I did not answer immediately. I let it ring. I watched the name flash on the screen, imagining the scene unfolding miles away. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, it rang again, then a third time. On the fourth ring, I tapped the screen and put the call on speakerphone. I leaned back in my chair and took a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso. "Naomi." His voice exploded out of the speaker. It was not the smooth, arrogant baritone of the man who had ordered me out of my own home. It was frantic, high-pitched, and vibrating with an ugly, panicked rage. "What kind of game are you playing?" I set my cup down gently. The porcelain barely made a sound. "I am not playing any games, Marcus. I am working. Something you might want to try." "Do not give me that condescending tone." His voice cracked slightly as he yelled. "I am standing in the middle of Phipps Plaza. Chloe is in tears. Her card was just declined for a $15,000 Birkin bag at Hermes. The cashier actually cut the card in half in front of the entire store. What the hell did you do?" The mental image of Chloe, the arrogant intern who had paraded through my foyer standing humiliated at a luxury checkout counter, was exquisite. The fact that Marcus was standing right beside her, emasculated and unable to fix it, was even better. I swiveled my chair slightly, looking out the window. "Marcus, did you honestly forget how those accounts are structured?" "What are you talking about?" he snapped. "Those American Express black cards you so generously handed out to your mistress. They are not personal credit lines. They are secondary cards linked directly to the primary operating accounts of my commercial real estate holding company, accounts that I solely control." There was a brief, stunned silence on his end. The realization was hitting him, but the full weight of it had not quite landed. "When you brought a stranger into my home and informed me of our impending divorce, I immediately audited my corporate liabilities." I explained, my voice as smooth and cold as polished ice. "I noticed several unauthorized, highly irregular charges being made by an individual who is not an employee, officer, or authorized agent of my corporation." "Naomi, you turn those cards back on right now. It is humiliating." "It is a felony," I corrected him sharply. "I reported those secondary cards as stolen due to unauthorized, fraudulent use by a third party. The bank canceled the lines of credit and flagged the accounts for suspicious activity. If Chloe tries to use any other card linked to my name, she will likely be detained for questioning regarding corporate theft." "You cannot do this. We are still legally married. Those are marital funds." "They are corporate funds, Marcus. I own the corporation. You do not." I took another slow sip of my espresso. "From now on, if you want to dress your intern in $15,000 handbags, you will have to use the money from your own venture capital fund." "Oh, wait." I paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be agonizing. You cannot do that either, can you? Because using client funds for personal luxury purchases is embezzlement. A sharp intake of breath hissed through the speaker. He was sweating now. The confident, untouchable venture capitalist was standing in a luxury mall, realizing that the golden goose had just severed its own neck and walked away. "You listen to me," Marcus growled, trying desperately to reclaim the dominant position. "You are angry, I get it. But you do not want to start a financial war with me. I will freeze every shared asset we have. I will tie you up in litigation for the next decade. You will regret pushing me." The hollow threat echoed in my quiet office. He was trying to fire a gun that had no bullets. He still believed he had leverage. He still believed the illusion of the sterling legacy carried enough weight to crush me. "I am not pushing you, Marcus," I said softly. "I am simply letting go." I tapped the screen and ended the call. I did not block his number. I wanted the line open. I wanted to hear the exact moment his panic turned into absolute, inescapable terror. The declined credit card was just a mild inconvenience. It was a paper cut. The real hemorrhage was scheduled to begin in exactly 45 minutes. I turned my attention back to my monitors. My legal team had confirmed the timeline earlier that morning. The property management firm retained by the new overseas owners of the Buckhead estate had filed the emergency paperwork at the county courthouse at 9 a.m. sharp. The sheriff's department had authorized the expedited eviction protocol. Marcus was currently miles away at a luxury mall trying to soothe a humiliated 24-year-old. He was likely promising her that this was just a minor hiccup, a temporary tantrum from a bitter ex-wife. He would assure her that they would go back to their sprawling $8 million mansion, pour a drink, and he would call his lawyers to put me in my place. I checked the GPS tracking application on a secondary monitor. I still had access to the location services on the luxury SUV. Marcus drove an SUV that was incidentally leased under one of my subsidiary companies. The digital icon showed his vehicle leaving the mall parking garage and heading north back toward the Buckhead neighborhood. The timing was almost poetic in its perfection. I picked up my desk phone and pressed the intercom button for Evelyn. "Yes, Naomi," her sharp professional voice answered immediately. "Is the asset recovery team in position at the Buckhead property?" I asked. "They arrived 10 minutes ago," Evelyn confirmed. "The county sheriff's deputies are currently on site. They are waiting for the occupants to return before executing the order." "Excellent. Inform them that the unauthorized occupants are currently en route. Estimated time of arrival is 12 minutes. I hung up the phone and leaned forward, resting my elbows on the cool mahogany desk. I stared at the blinking GPS dot as it navigated the digital map, moving steadily toward ground zero. Marcus had wanted me out of the house so he could start his new life. He had demanded my immediate departure with the arrogance of a man who believed the world existed solely to serve his desires. He was about to learn a very hard, very public lesson about the true nature of ownership. I watched the blinking dot turn off the main thoroughfare and onto the private tree-lined street that led to the estate. My pulse remained perfectly steady. There was no anxiety, no lingering sorrow, only the cold, calculated anticipation of a businesswoman watching a hostile takeover reach its final decisive stage. The GPS icon stopped moving. It had reached the front gates. The show was about to begin. The camera switched to a shaky, handheld perspective, tracking closely behind Marcus as he paced furiously across the marble foyer of the Buckhead mansion. His tailored linen suit, previously a symbol of his effortless dominance, now looked rumpled. The phone was pressed hard against his ear. His knuckles were white. He was roaring threats into the receiver, his voice echoing off the high ceilings, creating a chaotic, desperate soundscape. He was promising to freeze my assets, to hire a team of ruthless litigators, and to destroy my commercial empire brick by brick. He was screaming into the void. I had already hung up. Before he could even lower the phone from his ear, a sound shattered the quiet morning. It was not a polite, rhythmic knock. It was a heavy, authoritative pounding that reverberated through the heavy mahogany front door. It sounded like a battering ram. Marcus froze. He stared at the door, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. His mind, already scrambling to process the deactivated credit card, struggled to make sense of the sudden intrusion. He probably assumed it was a delivery driver, maybe a courier dropping off the divorce papers he had arrogantly promised to send me. He marched toward the entryway, yanking the heavy door open with a scowl ready to unleash his mounting rage on whoever stood on the other side. But it was not a courier. Standing on the immaculate front porch were two Fulton County Sheriff's deputies. Their uniforms were crisp, their expressions neutral, and completely devoid of the deference Marcus usually commanded. One of the deputies held a clipboard. The other held a large, brightly colored document and a roll of heavy-duty tape. Marcus Sterling, the lead deputy, asked, glancing down at a piece of paper. Marcus pulled himself up to his full height, attempting to project the authority of a wealthy homeowner whose privacy had just been rudely interrupted. Yes. What is the meaning of this? You are interrupting a private gathering. The deputy did not blink. He stepped forward and firmly slapped the brightly colored document directly onto the polished wood of the front door. He smoothed a piece of tape over it, securing it in place. We are executing a court-ordered 24-hour notice of eviction, the deputy stated, his voice flat and professional. The new legal owners of this property have filed an emergency petition for vacant possession. You and any other unauthorized occupants currently inside the residence have exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises. If you are not gone by 10 a.m. tomorrow, we will return to physically remove you and all of your belongings. Marcus stared at the deputy as if the man had just started speaking in a foreign language. The arrogance that usually defined his features melted away, replaced by a look of sheer, uncomprehending bewilderment. Eviction. Marcus sputtered a harsh, incredulous laugh escaping his lips. There has been a massive mistake. I own this house. This is my property. You need to get off my porch before I call the chief of police. I golf with him on Sundays. The deputy was entirely unimpressed. He tapped the document now taped to the door. According to the county property records, this estate is owned by a private holding company, which completed a cash transfer of ownership early this morning. The new owners have opted for immediate enforcement of their property rights. You are currently trespassing. Marcus snatched the document off the door, his eyes scanning the bold black text. His gaze dropped to the legal description of the property, confirming the address. Then his eyes found the section detailing the chain of title. The words hit him like a physical blow. He saw the name of the anonymous LLC. He saw the date the property was transferred to that LLC. It was 18 months ago, the exact time frame when I had placed a massive stack of tax optimization documents in front of him and told him to sign. The color completely drained from his face. The tan he had acquired over a weekend with his mistress vanished, leaving him looking ashen and sickly. The paperwork in his trembling hand was undeniable proof of his own catastrophic arrogance. He had signed away his kingdom without even glancing at the fine print. Behind him, Chloe appeared in the entryway. She was holding a fresh mimosa, her face a picture of youthful confusion. "Marcus, what is going on?" she asked, her voice high and annoying. "Who are these people?" Marcus did not answer her. He could not. His brain was desperately trying to process the magnitude of the disaster unfolding around him. He was standing in front of two armed deputies holding an eviction notice for a house he had just promised as collateral to his most powerful investors. Investors who were currently sitting in the backyard, drinking his champagne, waiting for him to finalize the paperwork on a $20 million bridge loan. If you attempt to damage the property or remove any fixtures before you vacate, the deputy continued, breaking through Marcus's rising panic, you will face additional criminal charges. We will be back tomorrow morning. The deputies turned and walked back to their cruiser parked in the circular driveway. Marcus stood frozen in the doorway, the eviction notice trembling in his hand. Chloe stepped closer, peering over his shoulder to read the document. Her eyes widened, the champagne glass slipping slightly in her grip. Eviction. Chloe whispered, the reality of the situation slowly dawning on her. Marcus, what does this mean? Why are we being evicted? I thought you owned this place. Marcus crumpled the paper in his fist. His breathing was shallow and ragged. He turned around, his eyes wild, sweeping across the grand foyer, the imported marble and the priceless art. None of it belonged to him. It never really had. He had brought his mistress into my home to humiliate me. He had tried to discard me like an outdated piece of furniture, And now he was the one being thrown out onto the street, exposed as a fraud to the very people he sought to impress. The camera of my imagination lingered on his face, capturing the exact moment the illusion of the Sterling legacy shattered. He was a squatter in a borrowed castle, and the real owner had just arrived to reclaim her throne. The camera tracks me relentlessly as I stride across the uneven dirt and gravel of my newest commercial development. The roar of massive diesel excavators and the sharp, rhythmic, metallic clang of steel beams being riveted together form the soundtrack of my actual life. I am wearing a pristine white hard hat that contrasts sharply with my charcoal-tailored suit and heavy-duty boots. I have to project my voice, speaking loudly and authoritatively to my site manager, pointing decisively toward the skeletal framework of what will soon be a 40-story office tower. This is where I belong. This is my domain. The air here does not smell like old money or stale privilege. It smells like progress, concrete, and absolute power. My phone vibrates in my pocket. I hold up a single gloved hand to pause my site manager. I pull out the device and glance at the screen. The caller ID shows a merged conference call. It is Beatrice and Sarah, the matriarch and the pick-me girl, calling together in a state of synchronized panic. I swipe to answer, pressing the phone firmly against my ear to hear them over the grinding gears of a nearby bulldozer. Gone is the venomous elegance from the night before. Gone is the old money superiority that allowed them to sit on my velvet sofa and dictate my worth. Beatrice is practically hyperventilating. Her words are tumbling over each other in a frantic, uncoordinated mess that strips away every ounce of her aristocratic polish. "Naomi," she gasps, her voice trembling so violently I can hear the rattle of her pearls over the phone. "What is happening right now?" "Marcus just called us in tears. He is raving about an eviction notice at the Buckhead house. He says the bank is freezing his accounts and that you sold the property out from under him. Please tell me this is a misunderstanding. Tell me you are just trying to scare him to teach him a lesson." Before I can even formulate a response, Sarah cuts in. Her tone is desperate, laced with terror, but she still tries to wrap her panic in that sickeningly fake morality she loves to weaponize. "Naomi, you have to stop this right now!" Sarah pleads, her voice shrill and demanding. "You are tearing this family apart over a mistake. Marcus is a man. Men have moments of weakness. You cannot throw your husband out on the street, and you certainly cannot do this publicly. You are taking things way too far. You are making the entire black community look bad by publicly destroying a prominent black man. You need to fix this and protect the family image." I let out a sharp, genuine laugh that gets swallowed by the noise of the construction site. I walk away from the heavy machinery, stepping up onto a raised concrete slab so they can hear my response with absolute terrifying clarity. I do not lower my voice. I speak with the full commanding volume of a CEO who holds their literal existence in the palm of her hand. "Sarah," I say, my voice cutting through the industrial noise like a steel blade, "do not ever try to weaponize my community against me. The community does not harbor fraudsters. The community does not protect men who steal from union pension funds to buy diamond necklaces for 24-year-old interns. Marcus is destroying himself. I simply removed my safety net so gravity could do its job." I pivot my attention to the woman who sat in my living room and told me I reeked of construction sites. I want her to smell the concrete through the phone. "And Beatrice," I continue, my tone dropping into a deadly conversational chill, "I highly hope you are sitting down, though I suggest you do not get too comfortable on that antique sofa of yours." "What do you mean?" Beatrice stammers, the sheer panic in her voice peaking. "My home has nothing to do with Marcus and his business. You leave my estate out of this." I smile, watching a massive yellow crane lift a steel girder high into the bright Atlanta sky. "Does it not?" I ask. "Your husband left this family drowning in debt a decade ago. The sterling legacy you are so incredibly proud of ran out of cash before I even met your son. Who do you think paid off the massive tax liens on your historic estate? Who do you think has been quietly paying the property taxes and the maintenance on that sprawling ancestral home for the last 10 years, just so you could keep hosting your high society garden parties?" Dead silence falls over the line. The realization hits her with the force of a freight train. I do not stop. I pressed the advantage, turning the crosshairs directly onto the woman who told me I was not a real wife. And Sarah, I add, letting a cruel amusement color my words. That luxury penthouse you and Julian live in. The one Julian claims he bought with his non-existent entrepreneurial profits. Take a wild, uneducated guess whose corporate portfolio actually holds the deed to that building. I can hear Sarah let out a choked, horrified gasp. The illusion they had lived in for the past decade is evaporating in real time. They thought they were royalty tolerating a peasant. They just realized they were squatters living entirely on the peasant's charity. I do not give them time to formulate a defense. I do not give them room to beg or negotiate or apologize. Both of you sat in my house and smiled while my husband tried to replace me. I state delivering the final verdict. You cheered for my downfall because my self-made success threatened your unearned, fragile sense of superiority. You wanted me to step aside gracefully. So here is your reality check. The grace period is officially over. Both of you have exactly 24 hours to pack your bags and vacate my company's properties. If you are not completely gone by this time tomorrow, I will have my private security teams physically remove your belongings, and I will personally call the Atlanta Police Department to have you arrested for criminal trespassing. Sarah starts to sob loudly into the receiver. Beatrice tries to scream my name, her voice cracking with the sheer, unadulterated terror of sudden and absolute poverty. I end the call. I slip the phone back into the pocket of my tailored trousers. The frantic cries of the Sterling women are instantly replaced by the roar of the construction site. It is a beautiful sound. I turn back to my site manager. He has been waiting patiently with a rolled-up set of architectural blueprints tucked under his arm. He looks at me completely unfazed by the brutal, one-sided conversation he just witnessed. He knows how I operate. I adjust my white hard hat, point a gloved finger toward the Eastern Foundation wall, and seamlessly resume giving my orders about pouring the next layer of reinforced concrete. The Sterling family legacy is currently crumbling into dust, but my empire is still rising. The camera performs a slow, agonizing dolly push-in on Marcus Sterling. He has barricaded himself inside the wood-paneled home office of the Buckhead mansion. The curtains are drawn tightly shut against the afternoon sun, casting the room in heavy, suffocating shadows. He is sweating profusely. His linen suit jacket has been discarded on the floor, his tie loosened, his collar unbuttoned. He looks like a man who has just realized he is standing on a landmine and has already heard the click. The piercing, relentless ring of his heavy mahogany desk phone cuts through the silence of the room. It is the dedicated, secure line, the one reserved exclusively for high-level communications with his primary financial institution. It rings again. The sound is harsh, abrasive, and commanding. Marcus stares at the blinking light on the console. His hands are trembling so violently he has to brace them against the edge of the desk. He takes a ragged, desperate breath and snatches the receiver. Marcus Sterling, he answers, fighting to keep his voice steady, projecting the hollow echo of his former arrogance. "Mr. Sterling, this is Richard Vance, Chief Risk Officer at Continental Trust." The voice on the other end is devoid of warmth. It is the sterile, measured tone of a corporate executioner. "We need to discuss the $20 million commercial bridge loan application your firm submitted this morning." Marcus closes his eyes, a flicker of desperate hope washing over his flushed face. He thinks this is just a procedural hiccup. He thinks his charm and the Sterling name can smooth over whatever minor detail has flagged the system. Richard, Marcus says, forcing a strained chuckle. "I was expecting a call from my loan officer, not the chief risk officer. Is there an issue with the paperwork? I know we pushed the timeline, but the collateral is solid." "There is a significant issue with the collateral," Mr. Sterling Vance replies, his voice dropping another degree in temperature. "Your application lists the residential property at 400 West Paces Ferry Road as the primary asset securing this loan." "Yes," Marcus confirms quickly, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "It is a prime piece of Buckhead real estate, valued at over $8 million, free and clear. Our legal department has verified the title history of that property," Vance states flatly. "The deed was transferred to an anonymous limited liability company 18 months ago. You are not the legal owner of that asset, Mr. Sterling. You have attempted to secure federal funds using collateral that you do not possess." That is a direct violation of federal banking regulations. Marcus feels the floor drop out from under him. The oxygen leaves the room. The eviction notice taped to the front door was not a mistake. It was not a glitch in the system. Naomi had meticulously legally stripped him of his only remaining asset while he was busy entertaining his mistress. Richard, there has been a misunderstanding. Marcus stammers, his voice cracking. My ex-wife, she handles the real estate portfolio. I can clear this up. I can offer alternative collateral. The fund has assets. Mr. Sterling, the loan denial is not the primary reason for this call. Vance interrupts, cutting off Marcus's desperate negotiation. Continental Trust has initiated a comprehensive review of your firm's operational accounts. We received a highly detailed, heavily encrypted dossier this morning from an anonymous whistleblower. The blood drains entirely from Marcus's face. His mouth opens but no sound comes out. The dossier contained undeniable proof of systemic financial fraud. Vance continues, his words striking like physical blows. We have verified multiple instances where you submitted corporate guarantee documents to this institution bearing the forged signature of Naomi Sterling. We have also tracked unauthorized illicit transfers of capital from your clients' escrow accounts into offshore shell companies. Marcus grips the edge of the desk until his knuckles turn stark white. He is a drowning man staring up at the surface of the water, realizing he is tethered to a concrete block. She had everything. She had the ledger. She had the forged documents. She had the offshore routing numbers. Naomi had not just walked out of his house. She had quietly detonated the entire foundation of his professional existence. Based on the severity of these findings, Vance states, delivering the final fatal judgment. Continental Trust is required by law to comply with federal anti-money laundering protocols. As of 10 minutes ago, we have completely frozen every single operational account associated with your venture capital fund. You no longer have access to any corporate capital operating liquidity or client reserves. Furthermore, we have officially flagged your accounts for fraudulent activity and forwarded the complete dossier to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. No. Marcus whispers, his voice barely audible over the roaring in his ears. You cannot do this. Richard, I can fix this. I need 24 hours. Just give me 24 hours. This is not a negotiation, Mr. Sterling, Vance replies, his tone finalizing the execution. Continental Trust is severing all ties with you and your firm effective immediately. We advise you to retain criminal defense counsel. Good day. The line goes dead. The dial tone drones endlessly in the dark, suffocating office. Marcus slowly lowers the receiver back onto the cradle. He stares at the heavy wooden desk, his mind completely blank. He has no money. He has no house. He has no fund. He cannot make payroll. He cannot pay his investors. He cannot even buy a cup of coffee without triggering a fraud alert. His cash flow has been completely decapitated. He is a billionaire on paper who suddenly cannot afford to breathe. Outside the heavy oak doors of his office, he hears Chloe's voice. She is on the phone with her mother, complaining about the eviction notice, whining about how unfair it is that my bitter ex-wife is making a scene. She is completely oblivious to the fact that she is standing in the epicenter of a financial apocalypse. Marcus buries his face in his hands. The sterling legacy built over generations has just been vaporized in less than 72 hours by the woman he thought he could discard like trash. He realizes with absolute terrifying clarity that Naomi never needed his name. She never needed his protection. She was the apex predator all along, and she had just swallowed him whole. The camera cuts to a high-energy Steadicam shot, moving with frantic, disorienting speed through the sleek glass-walled offices of Sterling Capital Management. The pristine, minimalist decor that Marcus had always insisted upon to project an image of untouchable wealth now serves as the perfect sterile backdrop for his utter destruction. Marcus is pacing like a caged animal behind the massive mahogany desk in his corner office. His linen suit, the same one he had worn to his ill-fated barbecue just hours before, is dark with sweat. He is screaming at two junior analysts who are standing paralyzed near the door. "I do not care what the error message says," Marcus roars, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "You bypass the digital safeguards and you wipe the offshore routing folders. Now. And get someone in here to physically shred the hard copies in the blue binders. Move." The analysts do not move. They are staring past Marcus out the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of his office toward the main reception area. The heavy frosted glass doors of the firm are thrown open with a violent crash. A wave of men and women wearing dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters FBI and SEC printed across the back floods into the reception area. They move with terrifying practiced efficiency. "Federal agents, hands off your keyboards. Step away from your desks immediately," the lead agent barks, his voice easily carrying across the open floor plan. The Steadicam weaves through the chaotic scene. Employees are freezing mid-keystroke, raising their hands in the air as agents swarm the cubicles. The illusion of the elite, untouchable venture capital firm is shattered in seconds. Agents are already unplugging servers, confiscating hard drives, and securing filing cabinets with bright red evidence tape. Marcus watches through the glass of his office, his face entirely devoid of color. The reality of what Naomi has unleashed upon him is finally crashing down with the full weight of the federal government. He lunges for his computer, desperately trying to yank the power cord from the wall. It is a pathetic, futile gesture. Before he can even reach the outlet, his office door is pushed open. Two FBI agents flank the entrance while a third, the lead agent, steps inside. The agent does not look impressed by the expensive art on the walls or the panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. He looks at Marcus like a man looking at a very tedious piece of paperwork. "Marcus Sterling," the agent says, stepping forward. Marcus straightens up, attempting to salvage the last microscopic shred of his dignity. "There has been a mistake," he stammers, his voice thin and reedy. "My firm is fully compliant. I want to speak to my attorney." "You will have plenty of time for that, Mr. Sterling," the agent replies, pulling a folded document from his jacket pocket. "We are executing a federal search and seizure warrant for these premises related to an ongoing investigation into wire fraud, forgery, and the misappropriation of client funds." The agent gestures to the two men flanking the door. They step forward, moving with swift, undeniable authority. Marcus instinctively takes a step back, hitting the edge of his mahogany desk. "You cannot do this. Do you know who I am? Do you know my family?" The lead agent ignores the outburst entirely. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," he orders. The Steadicam pushes in tight on Marcus's face. The arrogant, untouchable heir to the Sterling legacy is suddenly reduced to a trembling, sweating mess. The reality of his situation is inescapable. He turns around slowly, his shoulders slumping in absolute defeat. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs, echoing in the silent office, is the loudest sound in the room. The agents do not offer him the courtesy of a discreet exit through a back door or a private elevator. They escort him out the front of his office, parading him directly through the center of the trading floor. The camera follows Marcus as he is perp-walked past the sleek, modern desks where his employees are being questioned by federal agents. He is forced to walk past the glass-walled conference room where three of his most prominent high-net-worth investors have been waiting for over an hour for a meeting that will never happen. The investors stand near the glass, their faces masks of shock and disgust, as they watch the man who controls their portfolios being led away in handcuffs by the FBI. They pull out their phones, undoubtedly calling their own legal teams, realizing their investments are likely gone forever. Marcus keeps his head down, unable to meet the eyes of his staff or his clients. His bulletproof facade is gone. He is no longer a titan of industry. He is a criminal being paraded through the wreckage of his own arrogance. As he is led through the reception area and out the front doors, the camera lingers on the firm's silver logo mounted on the marble wall, Sterling Capital Management. The agents are already placing evidence tape over the glass doors, officially sealing the tomb of his professional life. He had tried to humiliate Naomi by bringing his mistress into her home. He had expected her to break. Instead, she had methodically dismantled his entire universe, ensuring that his public destruction would be swift, absolute, and spectacular. The camera perspective shifts to the absolute pinnacle of corporate power. A slow, low-angle circular shot begins a steady, unbroken rotation around my massive custom desk. From this vantage point looking upward, I am a monolith. The city skyline stretches out behind me, through the floor-to-ceiling glass framing my silhouette against the clouds. I am wearing a tailored emerald green suit, my posture impeccable, my expression carved from ice. The rotating lens catches the heavy double doors of my executive suite as they are shoved open. My private security team immediately steps into the frame, their hands hovering near their communications gear, ready to physically restrain the intruders. I simply raise a single manicured hand. The guards stop stepping back just enough to let the spectacle unfold. I want this meeting. I have earned this meeting. Marcus stumbles into the center of the room. The polished, untouchable venture capitalist who had paraded through his office just 48 hours ago is completely gone. He is out on bail, and the brief stint in federal holding has stripped away every ounce of his manufactured aristocratic charm. His designer suit is severely wrinkled, hanging off his frame like a borrowed costume. His tie is missing. His eyes are bloodshot and wild with the frantic, cornered energy of a man who has looked directly into the abyss of his own future. Trailing closely behind him is Chloe, the confident, triumphant 24-year-old who had strutted through my marble foyer in her red-bottom heels is unrecognizable. Her designer trench coat is rumpled, and her face is stained with streaks of ruined mascara. She is openly sobbing, her shoulders shaking with every ragged breath. She thought she was securing a lifetime of luxury and country club memberships. Instead, she has found herself legally tethered to a disgraced, bankrupt federal suspect. Naomi Marcus gasps, his voice cracking as he crosses the threshold. The low angle of the camera perfectly captures his sudden jarring smallness. Against the vast expanse of my boardroom and the towering height of my desk, he looks microscopic. I do not offer him a seat. I do not offer him a glass of water. I rest my forearms on the edge of the desk, interlocking my fingers and watch him unravel. "You have to call them off," Marcus pleads, his words tumbling out in a desperate, disjointed rush. "You have to call the attorneys, call the Securities and Exchange Commission, call the bank. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them the documents were a corporate error, a miscommunication between our financial departments. You are the only one who can retract the whistleblower complaint." He stops a few feet from my desk. The sheer gravity of my silence forces him downward. The arrogance breaks. The pride shatters. Marcus Sterling, the heir to an old-money Atlanta dynasty, physically collapses. He drops to his knees right in front of my desk, the expensive fabric of his trousers hitting the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. "Please, Naomi," he begs, tilting his head up to look at me. His face is a mask of pure terror. "You won. Do you hear me? You won the house, the money, the divorce. You proved your point. You destroyed the fund. But you cannot let them put me in a federal penitentiary. I will not survive in there. You know I will not survive a 10-year sentence." Chloe lets out a loud, pathetic sob from the back of the room, wrapping her arms around her stomach as if she might be sick. Marcus does not even look at her. His entire existence is entirely focused on the woman he threw away. I look down at him from my throne. The rotating camera captures the sharp contrast between his kneeling, trembling form and my absolute stillness. A misunderstanding, I repeat, my voice slicing through the room with the deadly calm of a judge delivering a capital sentence. "You want me to tell the federal government that your systematic embezzlement of union pension funds was a clerical error. You want me to tell the bank that the fraudulent guarantee bearing my forged signature was just a minor marital miscommunication." "I did it for us," Marcus cries out, throwing his hands up in a gesture of desperate justification. "I was trying to keep the Sterling legacy alive. You were always so focused on your own commercial empire, you never understood the pressure I was under to maintain my family's standing. The fund was bleeding capital. I needed the bridge loans to keep the investors from panicking. I was going to pay it all back, I just needed time." "You did not do it for us, Marcus," I correct him, my tone lowering into a dangerous, icy whisper. "You did it for yourself. You stole the life savings of working-class people so you could lease sports cars and buy diamond bracelets for the intern currently weeping behind you. You committed wire fraud because your fragile ego could not handle the fact that your wife was funding the lifestyle your ancestral name could no longer afford. Marcus shakes his head violently, tears of pure desperation spilling over his eyelashes. He resorts to the ultimate toxic weapon of a cornered manipulator. He weaponizes our history. 8 years, Naomi, he says, his voice breaking into a pathetic sob. We built a life together for 8 years. We stood in front of God and our families and took vows. You are my wife. You know the man I really am. You cannot throw away almost a decade of marriage and send your husband to rot in a federal cell. Have some mercy. I am begging you. Remember the woman you were when I married you. Remember the love we had. He reaches out, resting his trembling hands on the edge of my desk, looking up at me with the pleading eyes of a man hoping to exploit the compassion of a woman he chronically undervalued. He truly believes that because I endured his mother's insults because I stayed quiet, while his sister-in-law mocked my ambition, and because I played the role of the loyal wife, I must inherently harbor some lingering weakness for him. He expects the strong, independent black woman to fold, to become the nurturing savior who will sacrifice her own justice to protect a flawed man from the consequences of his own disastrous actions. The camera continues its slow, unrelenting orbit. It captures the tears on his face, the smeared makeup on his mistress, and the cold, unyielding architecture of my corporate sanctuary. I look at the hands gripping the edge of my desk. I look at the man kneeling on my floor. I feel absolutely nothing. No pity, no nostalgia, no residual affection. The man who brought a 24-year-old girl into my home and ordered me to sleep on the living room couch is now begging for his life at my feet. I lean back in my leather chair. I do not raise my voice. I do not need to. True power never has to shout. You are right about one thing, Marcus, I say, my voice echoing clearly over Chloe's continued sobbing. We were married for 8 years. I know exactly the man you are, and that is precisely why you are on your knees. The camera punches in tight, finding the exact center of my face. The lighting in the boardroom catches the sharp architectural lines of my cheekbones and the absolute unyielding coldness in my eyes. A slow, terrifying smile spreads across my lips. It is the smile of a predator who has finally cornered its prey after a long, patient hunt. Did you honestly believe I walked away quietly that night because I was broken? My voice is a whisper, but in the echoing silence of the executive suite, it sounds like a gunshot. Marcus stares up at me, his chest heaving, his eyes wide and uncomprehending. The man who had strutted through my marble foyer dragging his mistress's luggage is completely gone. In his place is a hollow shell desperately trying to understand how the ground beneath him had vanished so completely. No, Marcus. I continue, the smile hardening into a mask of pure vindictive triumph. I did not leave because I was a defeated wife surrendering my territory. I left because my legal team and my forensic accountants needed you to stay exactly where you were. I needed you complacent. I needed you arrogant. I needed you sitting in that house drinking my bourbon and bragging to your investors for exactly 72 hours. I place my hands flat on the polished mahogany of my desk, leaning forward so that my face is just inches from his. I want him to see every detail of his own destruction reflected in my eyes. I needed that specific window of time to finalize the offshore asset transfers, to execute the cash sale of the Buckhead estate to a foreign conglomerate, and to systematically dismantle your domestic accounts. I needed you distracted by your new little toy so you would not notice that the bank was quietly lowering the guillotine on your entire operational budget. You thought you had won a house. I was busy securing an empire and preparing your federal indictment. The camera executes a violent, lightning-fast whip pan, snapping away from Marcus and landing squarely on Chloe. She is standing near the heavy double doors, her arms wrapped tightly around her stomach. The color has entirely drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and translucent. The arrogant, triumphant girl who had run her fingers over my custom bronze sculpture is gone. She looks like a child who has just realized she is locked in a burning building. And Chloe. I say her name like a curse. I straighten up, shifting my focus entirely to the trembling 24-year-old. The camera pushes in slightly on her terrified expression as I deliver the kill shot. That brand new Porsche Cayenne Marcus leased for you last month. That stunning, flawless diamond tennis bracelet he draped around your wrist after you spent the weekend together in Miami. Chloe flinches, her breath hitching in her throat. She looks down at her wrist where the diamonds are still sparkling, suddenly looking less like a gift and more like a shackle. Do you know how he paid for those? I ask, my voice echoing with lethal clarity. He did not use his trust fund. He did not use the profits from his brilliant venture capital investments. He bought those trinkets using money he actively embezzled from the retirement accounts of union workers and public school teachers. Chloe lets out a choked, horrified gasp. She takes a stumbling step backward, hitting the heavy wooden door behind her. And the best part, Chloe, I continue reveling in the absolute terror radiating from her. When he gave you those gifts, he had you sign the delivery receipts and the luxury tax transfer documents, did he not? He told you it was just standard procedure for high-value items. She nods frantically, tears spilling over her eyelashes, ruining her carefully applied makeup. By signing those documents, I state, dropping the final devastating truth, you officially accepted stolen federal assets. You documented your receipt of funds obtained through a massive interstate wire fraud scheme. The Federal Bureau of Investigation does not view you as a naive, manipulated mistress, Chloe. On paper, in the eyes of the United States government, you are an active, documented accomplice to a multi-million-dollar federal crime. The silence that follows is absolute. It is the heavy, suffocating silence of total, inescapable ruin. Marcus remains on his knees, his head bowed, his breathing ragged. He has nothing left to say. He has no leverage, no charm, no ancestral name to hide behind. The sterling legacy is dead, and I am the one who drove the stake through its heart. Chloe slides slowly down the heavy wooden door, collapsing onto the floor. She pulls her knees to her chest, sobbing uncontrollably. The reality of federal prison, of ruined credit, of a life permanently stained by a felony conviction, is crashing down on her all at once. I stand behind my desk, adjusting the cuffs of my emerald green suit. I look down at the wreckage I have orchestrated. There is no guilt. There is no lingering sorrow. There is only the clean, sharp satisfaction of a balance sheet perfectly, ruthlessly reconciled. You came into my home to take what was mine, I say quietly, my voice ringing with finality. Now the government is going to take everything that is yours. I suggest you both call the best federal defense attorneys you can find. You are going to need them. The camera begins a slow, sweeping arc shot circling the three of us. The movement is deliberate, capturing the precise, agonizing seconds as the reality of my words sinks into Chloe's mind. The air in the boardroom is heavy, practically vibrating with the impending explosion. Chloe is no longer a smug, entitled intern playing house in a mansion she did not earn. She is a 24-year-old girl staring directly down the barrel of a federal indictment, and the survival instinct is kicking in with violent force. Chloe's eyes dart wildly from me to Marcus, then back to the diamond bracelet gleaming on her wrist. The diamonds, once a symbol of her conquest, now look like a neon sign flashing the word accomplice. Her breathing becomes erratic, her chest heaving as the panic overtakes her entirely. Marcus, still on his knees, turns to look at her, his face a mask of desperate pleading. Chloe, listen to me, he stammers, reaching a hand out toward her. We can fix this. My lawyers will handle it. They will say you did not know. You are just a junior staffer. They cannot prove you knew where the money came from. We just have to stick together. The camera shifts seamlessly into slow motion. The transition emphasizes the raw, visceral betrayal about to unfold. Chloe's face contorts, the terror instantly mutating into pure, unadulterated rage. She realizes she has chained herself to an anchor, and the only way to avoid drowning is to cut the line. She takes a step forward, her arm pulling back. The slap is spectacular. The sound echoes sharply across the executive suite, a sharp, cracking report that snaps Marcus's head to the side. The force of the blow leaves a stark red handprint blooming across his pale cheek. The slow motion captures the shock vibrating through his features, the absolute disbelief that the woman he threw away his marriage for has just physically assaulted him in front of his ex-wife. The camera speed snaps back to real time. "You lied to me!" Chloe screams, her voice shrill and hysterical, echoing off the glass walls. "You told me the fund was making record profits. You told me you were untouchable. You dragged me into a federal crime. I am not going to prison for you, Marcus. I am 24 years old. I am not ruining my life for a washed-up broke fraud." Marcus scrambles to his feet, holding his stinging cheek, his eyes wide with betrayal. "Chloe, stop. You do not know what you are saying. The FBI will tear you apart if you do not have my legal team protecting you." "I do not want your legal team," she shrieks, backing away toward the heavy double doors. "I want a plea deal. I am going straight to the federal building right now. I will tell them everything. I will give them your laptop passwords, your offshore account numbers, your private meeting schedules. I will turn state's witness before you even have time to call a bail bondsman." Chloe does not wait for a response. She turns and runs out of the boardroom, the doors slamming shut behind her with a definitive final thud. The sound of her heels clicking frantically down the marble corridor fades away, leaving Marcus completely alone with me. He stands there swaying slightly, the red mark on his face a stark reminder of his sudden total isolation. He opens his mouth to speak, perhaps to try one last pathetic negotiation, but the sharp, abrasive buzzing of a cell phone cuts him off. It is his phone. The screen illuminates from inside his jacket pocket. I nod toward his chest. "You might want to answer that, Marcus. I have a feeling it is important." He fumbles with his jacket, his hands trembling so badly he drops the phone onto the floor before managing to pick it up. The caller ID flashes brightly in the dim light of the boardroom. It is Julian, his older brother. Marcus swipes to answer, bringing the phone to his ear, his voice hollow. "Julian, I cannot talk right now. The SEC just raided." The voice on the other end is so loud, so filled with absolute unfiltered rage, that I can hear every word clearly from behind my desk. "You son of a bitch!" Julian roars, the audio crackling through the phone's small speaker. "What the hell did you do? The feds are at Mom's house!" Marcus freezes, the remaining color draining from his face. "What are you talking about? Why are they at Beatrice's house?" "Because they are seizing her accounts." Marcus Julian screams, his voice breaking with panic and fury. "The federal agents just handed her a seizure warrant. They said her pension fund and the family trust are tied to a massive wire fraud investigation. They are freezing everything." Marcus's knees buckle slightly, and he leans heavily against one of the leather conference chairs. "Julian, I can explain. It was just a temporary reallocation of funds. The market dipped and I needed to float the venture capital accounts for a few months. I was going to put it all back." "You stole Mom's pension!" Julian shouts, the reality of the situation fully setting in. "You embezzled the family trust to cover your bad investments." "Sarah is packing her bags right now. The country club just called and suspended our memberships. We are ruined, Marcus. We are completely, entirely ruined because of you. Do not ever call this family again. You are dead to us." The line goes dead with a sharp click. The silence that descends on the boardroom is heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Marcus slowly lowers the phone, his arm dropping limply to his side. The phone slips from his fingers, clattering onto the hardwood floor. He does not even try to pick it up. He stands there staring blankly at the wall, a man who has just witnessed the total catastrophic vaporization of his entire existence. In the span of 48 hours, the arrogant old money venture capitalist has lost everything. The Buckhead mansion is gone, sold out from under him. The $20 million bridge loan is denied, his accounts frozen by the bank. His venture capital fund has been raided by the FBI and the SEC, his reputation permanently destroyed. His mistress has violently turned on him, rushing to the federal building to testify against him. And now his family, the vaunted Sterling dynasty he was so desperate to protect, has disowned him after realizing he stole their retirement funds to finance his fraudulent lifestyle. He has lost his wife, his mistress, his family, his money, and very soon he will lose his freedom. I remain seated behind my desk, my posture perfect, my hands resting lightly on the mahogany surface. I watch the total collapse of Marcus Sterling with the cool, detached observation of an architect inspecting a perfectly executed demolition. There is no screaming, no dramatic confrontation. There is only the quiet, devastating finality of a man realizing he has engineered his own absolute ruin. Marcus finally turns his head to look at me. His eyes are empty, vacant windows into a shattered soul. He opens his mouth, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to ask for help, but there are no words left. He knows that any plea for mercy will shatter against the cold, unyielding reality of what he has done. He slowly turns around. His shoulders slumped, his steps heavy and dragging. He walks out of the boardroom, a defeated, broken man, heading out into a world that no longer has a place for him. The heavy double doors close behind him with a soft click, sealing the tomb on his former life. I am alone in my executive suite. The city of Atlanta stretches out before me, bathed in the warm golden light of the late afternoon sun. My empire remains untouched, secure, and thriving. I built this life with my own hands, and I have successfully defended it against the man who tried to tear it down. The game is over, the board is cleared, and I am the only one left standing. The camera executes a slow, deliberate tracking shot, capturing the stark visual contrast between the pristine elevation of my empire and the smoldering ashes of Marcus's life. The lens pans across a flawless pane of floor-to-ceiling glass on the top floor of my newly acquired commercial skyscraper. The Atlanta sun glints off the polished steel, illuminating a world of limitless power and absolute control. Then a hard, unforgiving cut transports the perspective to the stark gray concrete walls of a federal courthouse. The contrast is visceral, light and dark, sky and stone, victory and ruin. Marcus Sterling stands before a federal judge, but he is entirely unrecognizable. He is no longer the impeccably tailored venture capitalist who smoked imported cigars by infinity pools and boasted about his financial conquests. He is wearing a standard-issue drab olive jumpsuit that hangs loosely off his diminished frame. The unearned arrogance has been violently stripped away, leaving only a hollow, terrified shell of a man trembling in the harsh, fluorescent lighting of the courtroom. The prosecution did not even have to break a sweat. The digital trail I handed them was a flawless, undeniable masterpiece of self-incrimination. The judge delivers the sentence with zero hesitation and zero mercy. 10 years in a federal penitentiary for massive financial fraud, systemic embezzlement, and forgery. The sharp crack of the judge's gavel hitting the sound block rings through the silent courtroom. It echoes like the final nail being driven directly into the coffin of the Sterling legacy. Marcus jumps at the sound. As the federal bailiffs step forward to shackle his wrists and lead him away, he casts one final desperate look over his shoulder toward the gallery. He is looking for someone to save him. He is looking for a lifeline. There is no one. He is led out of the heavy wooden doors destined to spend the next decade of his life in a 6 by 8 foot concrete cell stripped of his name, his status, and his freedom. The tracking shot continues its slow, methodical descent, moving away from the courthouse and plunging into the gritty, unforgiving reality the rest of the Sterling family now faces. Beatrice and Julian are sitting in the cramped, humid living room of a dilapidated duplex in a low-income suburb far outside the city limits. Atlanta's black elite operates with a ruthless, silent efficiency when excising a cancerous embarrassment from its ranks. The very moment the FBI raided Marcus's office and the scandal hit the evening news, the Sterling name became radioactive. Country club memberships were revoked without a courtesy phone call. Gala invitations permanently ceased. Their former friends and high society acquaintances simply stopped recognizing them in public, looking through them as if they were made of glass. To pay for Marcus's high-priced criminal defense attorneys, Beatrice and Julian were forced to liquidate every single remaining asset they possessed. They sold off the antique furniture, the luxury vehicles they had leased to keep up appearances, and the remaining heirlooms. It was a complete, humiliating financial hemorrhage that left them with absolutely nothing but the clothes on their backs. The camera pushes in slightly on Sarah, the woman who once sat on my custom velvet sofa, sipping chamomile tea and preaching to me about a woman's proper place, is now aggressively scrubbing a cheap stained linoleum kitchen counter. The suffocating irony of her situation is almost poetic in its cruelty. She married into the Sterling family specifically for the prestige. She was desperate to secure her place in high society by weaponizing her toxic loyalty and offering unsolicited lectures on Black family unity. Now she is the ultimate inescapable scapegoat. Beatrice, entirely stripped of her wealth and forever separated from her beloved golden child, directs all her venomous bitterness squarely at her daughter-in-law. Julian, emasculated, broke, and entirely incapable of holding down a real job, joins his mother in the relentless verbal abuse. They blame Sarah for not stopping the collapse. They blame her for bringing bad luck. They blame her for simply breathing the same stale air in their cramped, miserable living space. Sarah's hypocritical lectures have turned to absolute dust in her mouth. She is trapped in a hostile, impoverished nightmare of her own making, tethered to a family that openly despises her, but cannot afford to let her leave because they desperately need her minimum wage income just to keep the lights on. She traded her dignity for a seat at a table that no longer exists. The tracking shot seamlessly transitions one final time, moving away from the suffocating duplex and gliding through the greasy, steam-filled kitchen of a 24-hour roadside diner. The camera finds Chloe. She is not wearing a white designer sundress. She is not strutting in red bottom heels or flashing a triumphant, arrogant smile. She is wearing a stained, ill-fitting polyester uniform, her hair tied back tightly beneath a mandatory mesh hairnet. She holds a damp gray rag wiping down a sticky Formica table, while a disgruntled truck driver barks a coffee order at her. Her panicked cooperation with the Federal Bureau of Investigation saved her from a federal prison sentence, earning her a plea deal that included 3 years of strict, heavily monitored probation. However, the felony fraud conviction permanently destroyed her future. The judge formally revoked her financial licenses and banned her from ever working in the financial sector again. She is blacklisted from every corporate office, bank, and investment firm in the country. The 24-year-old girl who thought she had successfully secured a billionaire lifestyle by sleeping with a married man is now working double shifts on her feet just to pay off her court-mandated restitution fees. She looks utterly exhausted, thoroughly broken by the harsh reality that there are no shortcuts to the top. The luxurious elevator she tried to ride up was actually a trapdoor leading straight to the basement. Every time she wipes a table or pours a cup of cheap coffee, she is forced to remember the diamond bracelets and the sports cars she held for a fleeting, stolen moment. I observe all of this from a distance, completely detached from their suffering. I do not actively punish them anymore. I do not need to. I simply removed the foundation they were illegally standing on and allowed gravity to do the rest. The justice system, the social hierarchy, and their own toxic personalities have become their permanent wardens. They built their lives on arrogance, theft, and deception, and now they are buried under the rubble of their own choices. The sharp, crisp sound of heavy golden scissors slicing through a thick crimson ribbon echoes through the plaza. It is immediately followed by a deafening roar of applause. The camera begins a slow, deliberate pull back, starting from right behind my right shoulder. The lens captures the exact moment the silk parts and falls gracefully to the marble pavement. I am standing at the epicenter of my newest, most ambitious creation to date. It is a $500 million commercial complex in the heart of downtown Atlanta. It is not just a building. It is a sprawling metropolis of glass, steel, and eco-friendly architecture. It is a monument to my resilience, my vision, and my absolute dominance in this city. I am wearing a custom-tailored, immaculate white silk power suit. White is the color of a clean slate. It is the color of a woman who has walked through the fire and emerged without a single trace of ash on her garments. I look radiant. I look powerful. And above all else, I look utterly unbothered. The crowd gathered in the plaza represents the true power brokers of the state. There are mayors, senators, and the genuine self-made titans of the Black elite. The very people who politely tolerated Marcus and his dwindling old money lineage are now standing on their feet clapping until their hands ache, desperate for a fraction of my attention. They know who holds the real power. They know who controls the skyline. I hand the golden scissors to an assistant and step up to the sleek, clear acrylic podium. The camera continues its steady, fluid backward motion, lifting slightly off the ground, ascending smoothly into a sweeping crane shot. The perspective widens, pulling back to reveal the sheer, breathtaking magnitude of the empire I own. Towering glass skyscrapers stretch up into the brilliant blue afternoon sky, completely dwarfing the memory of the $8 million Buckhead mansion that Marcus had lost his mind over. He had waged a pathetic, desperate war over a single grain of sand, entirely oblivious to the fact that I owned the entire desert. I place my hands lightly on the edges of the podium. I look out over the cheering crowd, out over the vibrant city skyline, and the world around me fades into a muted ambient hum. The popping of champagne corks and the rapid flashes of press cameras blur into the background. My voiceover monologue begins calm, measured, and lethally precise. He thought bringing his mistress into my home would humiliate me. He truly believed that parading a 24-year-old intern in her red bottom heels across my marble foyer was the ultimate checkmate power move. He expected me to shatter into a million pieces right there in the living room. He wanted the screaming match. He wanted the bitter tears. He wanted the desperate, undignified begging. He needed me to act like a broken, hysterical woman because his own ego was so breathtakingly fragile that it could only be sustained by tearing me down. He thought that by threatening to take away my title as his wife, he was stripping me of my entire identity. He looked at the empire I had built with my own two hands and somehow convinced himself that he was the architect. He thought his cruelty would prove I was completely worthless without him. The camera rises higher now, capturing the massive central fountain of the plaza, the manicured green spaces, and the thousands of people gathered to witness my triumph. The sterling name is nowhere to be found. It has been erased from the city records, scrubbed from the financial sector, and relegated to the whispers of cautionary tales. At the apex of the towering glass structures, only my corporate crest catches the golden sunlight. Marcus measured power in borrowed mansions, leased sports cars, and the hollow prestige of a dying family name. My internal voice continues resonating with cold, hard truth. He measured strength by how loudly he could shout and how cruelly he could belittle the people who actually loved him. But he forgot the most fundamental rule of survival in business. It is a rule I learned while clawing my way up from the bottom, building this empire from the concrete up. The loudest person in the room is always the weakest. The one who boasts, who threatens, who brings arrogance to a corporate war is already a dead man walking. The crane shot reaches its peak, capturing the absolute supremacy of my position. I am a solitary figure in white, commanding a kingdom of steel and glass. The person who packs their bags in total silence is never the loser. I state the words, landing with the finality of a gavel strike. Silence is not surrender. Silence is a heavily fortified bunker. It is the tactical withdrawal of a general who has just realized the enemy is standing entirely on rigged ground. When I walked up those glass stairs, packed my 2 suitcases, and dropped my diamond ring into his bourbon, I was not running away. I was running a complex calculation. I was assessing the blast radius. They are just stepping back to a safe minimum distance to press the detonator. I let the roar of the crowd wash over me one last time. I do not look at the mayor standing to my left. I do not look at the eager journalists waving their microphones, desperate for a quote. I do not need their validation. My victory is complete, self-sustaining, and absolute. I turn my head slowly, deliberately away from the skyline. I look directly into the camera lens, breaking the invisible barrier between my world and yours. A slow, mysterious smile spreads across my lips. It is not a smile of simple joy. It is the smile of a queen who has not just defended her throne, but expanded her kingdom over the ashes of her enemies. It is a victorious, chilling promise to anyone who might ever dare to underestimate me again.